Why are disasters so hard to predict? Why are those who warn of disasters so often ignored? How do social networks contribute to the spread of disinformation? These are among the questions taken on by historian and senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, Neil Ferguson, in his new book, Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe. Neil joins us now to talk about that. Great to have you on. And just looking, I guess, starting with the coronavirus pandemic, which got a lot worse than it needed to. Don't you think at this point it started with disinformation even from the very top in the United States of America?
Mika, that was certainly part of the problem. But I think if we tell ourselves that if only someone else had been president, someone other than Donald Trump, we'd have done much, much better, we might be kidding ourselves. As I show in the book, which only deals towards the end with COVID-19, President Trump made any number of mistakes, but that's not really why we ended up with 500,000 plus of excess mortality. Remember, we know how this was done well because in Taiwan and in South Korea, they ramped up testing, they did integrated contact tracing, and they isolated the infected or the suspected infected. We did none of those things. And I think it's a mistake to say that that was all Trump's fault, because in practice, it's not really the president who organizes pandemic response. Let's not kid ourselves. The president's not the sort of king emperor. There's a public health bureaucracy whose job this is. There's a deputy secretary for preparedness, a guy named Robert Kadlec last year. And I think it must be admitted that those different parts of the bureaucracy failed, despite being on paper prepared for a pandemic. And I think that's one of the puzzles I address in the book. On paper, the United States and the UK were well prepared for a pandemic in 2019, and they had lots and lots of pandemic preparedness plans. It's just that when a pandemic happened, none of those plans worked. And so I think we have to get away from the simplistic narrative that this was all Trump's fault. And remember something Ron Klain said recently, which was that if the 2009 swine flu had been as bad as COVID, it's not clear that the Obama administration would have done a whole lot better.
Well, so Neil, I want to talk about your book. I don't want to get weighed down in this, but yeah, I do have to say Matthew Pottinger and so many others were warning the president, were warning health officials starting on December 31st, 2019 about this, and they did not respond adequately. You can respond to that if you want.
Well, the pandemic response team.
I would like to broaden the aperture a bit here, though, and talk about why the United States, whether it's our response to 2001, and some would say our overreaction to that for 2 decades, our response to 2008, our response to this pandemic. Why is it that we eventually get it right? And we do. If you look at Bush's policies in Iraq in 08, 09, we figured out how to get it right. Then we left and all hell broke loose again. If you look at what happened with subprime, that crisis, we eventually got that right. You look at the pandemic, we eventually got that right if you look at how we're doing on vaccinations compared to the rest of the world. But why does it take the United States in particular so long to turn this massive ship around, where South Korea, like you said, moved quickly and efficiently and protected their people?
Well, that's the right question, Joe, because Doom is a book about disasters. And the question is, are we getting worse at handling them, despite the fact that our scientific knowledge seems to be increasing? And I think if you look back over the post-Cold War period, it's not a pretty picture. It's as if each president gets a different disaster from the one that he was prepared for. 9/11, I think you're right to say, we did not handle well. Ultimately, I think historians will say that going into Iraq was not a logical response to that crisis and ended up creating huge unintended adverse consequences. And then, of course, there's the financial crisis. And that's quite similar in some ways to the COVID story, because on paper, there was lots of regulation of banks in 2007, 2008. In fact, banks were the most regulated parts of the financial system, and yet the system blew up. So the answer that I offer in the book is that over time, we've become more bureaucratic in our approach to risk management. In other words, the federal bureaucracy really likes to draw up enormously complex contingency plans and regulations designed to avert crises. And this makes our system very unwieldy. Whereas in Taiwan and in South Korea, what strikes me when I look at their response is its nimbleness. They were extremely quick to ramp up testing right at the beginning of this crisis, whereas in the US, the very centralized system of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention actually limited testing, and then the CDC capped it all by producing a test that didn't work. So one has to, I think, look quite closely at this pattern of bureaucratic failure, because we have the illusion of preparedness. On paper, we're set for these crises, and yet when they happen, they take us by surprise. I don't think you could say that if you look back at earlier periods. Let's think of, say, the 1950s, when the United States had to contend with a great many disasters, from the Korean War to the 1957-58 Asian flu. And I think the generation that had come through World War II understood better that you have to be very quick on your feet in a crisis. I think that's what we've got bad at. And we need to look at, for example, the way Taiwan used technology. One of the great mysteries of 2020 is why the United States, which has the biggest technology companies in the world, companies that have data and enormous amounts of data on all of us, why they weren't able to produce a good contact tracing app. And it's not like they couldn't have done it. But I think one has to conclude that they decided not to because there were downside risks, even although that would have put all the data they have at their disposal to some good public use.
Neil, you write in the book about a relatively new variable faced by governments in the face of catastrophes, and that is social media. That when a government is trying to attack a problem, it is often met online, on Facebook and other places, with dissenting information saying, well, this isn't as bad as the media is making it sound. It's not as bad as public health experts are making it sound. And now we're in the phase of, well, you shouldn't get the vaccine. You shouldn't trust the vaccine. How do you factor that into this equation now, which is something, of course, as you talk about the 1950s and well before, something that no government had to contend with?
Well, Willie, that's a great question. And in my last book, The Square and the Tower, I tried to argue that we had a problem with the way the internet had evolved, because a relatively small number of platforms like Facebook and Google were capable of disseminating disinformation and misinformation on a scale that we've never seen before. Of course, it's as old as human history that in a plague you get crazy ideas. That was true in the Black Death of the 1340s. It's just that crazy ideas are much, much easier to transmit to billions of people today. And I think that second contagion of fake news about the virus, about possible remedies, and then, of course, about vaccines has been a huge obstacle, and not just in the United States. So I think we still have to remember that we haven't fixed the problem that first really became apparent back in 2016. That our public sphere is now, to a very large extent, dominated by companies whose principal interest is getting eyeballs to stay on screens to look at ads, which is how the money gets made. If that's your incentive, then you're essentially going to be a machine for disseminating clickbait. And I think if you look at, say, Facebook's role in spreading anti-vax ideas, it's really a bit of a shocker that there was no serious attempt last year, as far as I can see, to address the super spreader problem. Because what's interesting is that just like the virus is spread by super spreaders, about 20% of infected people do 80% of the spreading, the same is true in the internet. There are super spreaders who spread nonsense about vaccines and nonsense about the virus. And we know that Facebook looked at this, was aware of this problem, but really didn't do terribly much to address it, because in the end, this is how the money gets made, through sensational fake news that people can't quite take their eyeballs off.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.